welcome to Smart Form Building. This is Form Building Session 102, Building Smart Forms. I will be your host, MJ Niscoda, and your presenter will be Barrett Johannesson. Upcoming events for iForm Builder, just want to throw this out there. We're going to have another round of our iForm Builder certification coming up here at the beginning of July. If you have not taken this class and you would like to learn more about iForm and become certified, it is a great course to take. We've been doing it for, I believe, about a year now. Barrett, correct me if I'm wrong.
It'll be a year in August.
Okay. And I mean, a lot of people are pulling value out of it. It's very similar to these two, 101 and 102 classes you're taking right now, except dives a little further into the actual form building aspect and a lot more one-on-one. So anyone planning to roll out projects within their groups or would really like to get a jump on how to use the form builder, again, it is a great class to attend.
All right. Well, MJ, thank you so much for going over some of those basics for the webinar. For those of you who this is the first iForm Builder Xerion software webinar you've attended, welcome. My name is Barrett Johannesson. So just a little bit about today's session. We're going to discuss what are smart forms, some of the best practices for form building and adding those smart forms or smart controls to your forms, and I'll do a form demo, and then we'll go into a preview of our Form Builder 2.0, and then a quick Q&A session. But the most important thing for today, oops, I went a little too fast on that one. But the most important thing that I want to make sure that you get out of today is that we're going to focus on how to really cut down on the data cleansing and make it a better user experience. And for both people, the people who are out in the field collecting the data, but also those individuals who are viewing the data. And if you're automatically pushing that data into other external systems, how do you control how that data appears to make it into a smooth transition? So those are some of the things that we're going to talk about. So usually I go through and I talk about the different support options available. And today I'm just going to point out that we do have all of these different support outlets, and if there's anything that you need done, we're here for you. One of the best ways to get in touch with us is to go through our Customer Success Center and chat with one of our iForm Builder agents. If you do that, then they're happy to point you in the right direction, and if you're looking even just for how to use some implementation support hours, then they'll definitely make sure you're in touch with the right people. Again, since I'll be emailing you this PDF, all of these are links that you can click on to go and check out some of those other support options. So let's start with this. What are smart forms? They're designed to eliminate error by the users, eliminate that post-data cleansing. They use widgets or element input types like option lists, range, and the counter widget, and so many of our other widgets, just instead of using free text. So eliminating the user actually having to type in that information. Smart forms also include descriptions and fields with when you have longer questions, so they give more details to the user so that they can see those while they're completing the response. And you're also, with the smart forms, you also can include masks, so you can eliminate error by adding those masks to your form. In just a few minutes, I will be giving you a demo of a form that I've created to show you what a smart form actually looks like, and we can walk through that form and go through how some of those pieces were added. So some of the best practices that we have, your initial project considerations. These are things that if you've attended our other webinars, you may have heard some of these, but I always like to remind people of these during our smart form building because I think it's really very vital. The first is to pay attention to what devices your end users will have access to. With iForm Builder, we do have the app available on both iOS and Android devices. And so you want to make sure that you're aware of what your end users are going to have access to, because the form does appear differently on both different, or slightly different on the different kind of platforms. The other piece is, because iForm started on iOS devices, there are some capabilities that are only on iOS right now and have not yet been added to Android. So it's really important that you pay attention to those differences so that you're not adding something to your form that Android users won't be able to access and won't be able to use.
Hey Barrett,
Yep.
quick question, actually perfect for what you're going over. Since you're a little more closer to the development team than I am, will descriptions be included in future updates for the Android app?
I hope so. That is something that I know is in the pipeline. I've actually checked into that just a few weeks ago. So I was told that in 2016 it should be added.
Okay. No.
And thank you. For those of you who aren't quite sure where the description field is, I'll show you that in just a few minutes when I show you that demo form. MJ, was there any other questions?
No, that was just the first one for now, and I mean, Barrett, I think this should be noted as well for everyone that's on this webinar here. Like Barrett said, for 2016, there's been a big push for the Android to bring it up, pretty much to an even playing field with iOS, and it's something that's been, I personally know, has been actively being worked on by one of our developers. It's pretty much his sole job throughout the summer. So I'm hoping, again, with Barrett, by the end of 2016, we'll see those apps pretty much even.
Thanks, MJ. You're right on with the money with that, so thank you. Next, with our initial project consideration, one thing that you want to make sure you do is that you want to make sure you use a naming convention for the forms that you're building. And I'll show you an example of that as well, but this is extremely helpful when you're deploying your initial projects, because the more forms you create, the more organization you need, and sometimes you have more people that are creating those forms. And so by having a set naming convention, it makes it much easier to find them within your form builder account. The next consideration is, how do you structure the form? A lot of times we're taking those paper forms and we're just converting it to mobile, but iForm allows you to do so much more than that. So what you want to start thinking about is, where do you split up the form to add subforms? Where are you going to add smart controls, or what questions or element input types are you going to use for each type of question? And the last one is, where can you add form functionality? So basically, what we're going to be talking about today is, how do you cut down on that human error and input by adding smart controls to your form? So as I mentioned earlier, using a naming convention is extremely helpful when you're building out your forms. What I always do is I have the parent form name and then _P for that naming convention. And if there's a subform attached, then I have the parent form name _ and whatever the subform name is, and then _C. And just to show you how I set that up, these are the two forms that we'll be going through today, and this is my parent form. If I go to the table name, you'll notice that I have June 2016 Smart Forms Webinar _P. So that's the parent form name. And if I go to the subform that's attached, I'll find it right underneath the parent form in this form builder home. And then once I load that, I'll show you where that naming convention is underneath. So that's the table name. The form label can be whatever you want it to be. I just always have the naming convention for the table name, because that's what you see in the back end. And when you're assigning forms to your users, this is also what you'll see. And so since you only have to assign the parent form, or that top level, having this naming convention makes it much easier for that assignment process. Going forward, as I mentioned earlier, you always want to build for the device type. So if your users are going to be using Android, build for Android and test on Android. If they're going to be using iOS, build on an iOS device and test on an iOS. If they're going to have access to both, then make sure as you're building your forms that you have both types of devices with you, so that you can test them and make sure everything is functioning properly and looking the way that you want. The next best practice is to make sure that you build for the smallest device type. So let's say you are only using iOS and Apple devices. Maybe one user is going to have access to an iPhone, while the other is going to have access to an iPad. When you're building your forms, you want to make sure that you're always testing on the smallest device, so that iPhone, because we do have widgets like the select option list and the toggle widget, where it does matter how much text you place within that label, because if you have too much, then it'll actually cut off some of that text. So we would hate for that to happen. So make sure that you are always looking at the smallest device and testing on the smallest device your users may have access to. On Android devices, with the select option list and the toggle, the text will actually wrap. So they do function a little bit differently than the iOS, but a lot of times users don't actually like how the wrapped text looks. So make sure that when you're testing, you also are looking at the smallest Android device. And if you're looking to see the exact differences, I do have this link at the bottom of the page here, which will bring up our Customer Success Center article on the differences between the iOS and Android. So let's just jump there briefly to show you.
Hey Barrett, I actually had a really interesting question come up. Are there any plans, with the new form builder coming out, for the groupings of forms in the management web portal? Basically meaning as time goes by, some users add, hundreds of forms, and it kind of becomes a pain to find them.
So as of right now, I do not know of that being in the pipeline, but we are having this awesome event right now actually called a feature frenzy. And I think that's definitely something that should be added to it, because I think that would be a great addition. And the feature frenzy link can be found at our Customer Success Center. So this is our feature frenzy. And while we're talking about it, I'll just take the link and I'll post it in the chat so you guys can go ahead and visit that and put all of your ideas in there and then vote on other ideas that you like. So as I mentioned, with the differences between the iOS and Android, on this particular help desk article, if you scroll down, we have our Apple or iOS on the left-hand side and the Android on the right. So you can see already there are some blank spots on the Android side where we don't have those capabilities in there quite yet. So going on with our best practices, always make sure you have a device handy while you're building your forms. I always have multiple browser windows open so that it eliminates error when I'm copying data column names. So as you may have noticed, when I showed you the table names, I have two tabs open right now, one for my parent form and one for my subform. For the subform that I created, I actually was passing some of the data from the parent form into the subform, and so I needed to copy the data column name from the parent form, and that's why I had both windows open so that I wasn't opening and closing the form builder, and probably making more mistakes if I did do that. Another best practice is really something just to note, that every form that you create as the form builder is automatically going to be assigned to your username. So if you want to have the same user experience as your end users, then you want to go under form assignment and uncheck those boxes of the subform so that you only see the parent form, that top layer, assigned to your device. And so you can see exactly what they see. Another thing to note there is you may also want to just unassign some of the forms so that it's a faster upload and download speed on the iForm app. The next best practice is to make sure that you limit the amount of elements on the parent form. This is where using subforms makes a lot of sense when you're building out your different projects. The first thing to note is if I were to just have one level of a form and have, let's say, 150 questions that I wanted to ask, if that was all just on a parent form or one level, that could be a little bit overwhelming to your users. And not only could they potentially lose where they were on the form, but if I were to then complete that whole form and try to sync that record to the cloud, with 150 questions, if there are smart controls in there and a lot of photos, then it's going to take a long time to sync that record to the cloud. Not only that, it may actually time out when the user tries to sync, and they'll have to continuously try to sync to get that data to the cloud. So it's really important that you think about that when you're building out your forms. And that's why I suggest to instead have those 150 questions split up into different subforms. Even if that means that you have over 200 questions, if they're all in subforms, it's going to be a much faster sync, because the way that the upload functionality occurs within iForm, it does one layer at a time. So it's less likely to time out in that way. And the last best practice that we have is to make sure that you follow the Form Builder Golden Rules. And so here are the 3 Form Builder Golden Rules. The first one sometimes seems a little bit obvious to people, but it's always a good reminder. I would hate for you to have people trying to collect data and not be able to because you didn't test the form before assigning it to them. So always, always, always test before going live. If the form is already live and you make a change, make sure you do that at a time where you don't have users out collecting data, so that if there is a problem with what you've added, then you can fix it quickly without them even noticing. So a lot of times if I have a live form, I try to do it late at night when no one's going to be using that form, so that I can continuously test. And then when they wake up in the morning and they're getting ready to collect data, all those changes have been made and they won't run into any problems with data collecting. The second golden rule is to make sure that you use unique data column names that are database friendly. And we do have a list of terms here on our Customer Success Center of terms you should not use for the data column names. For those of you who are relatively new to form building, when I'm saying and referencing data column names, when we're in the form builder, in our common section, we have a label and then we have a data column name underneath that. The data column name is what needs to be database friendly. If you're unaware of how this works and you're not sure about data column names and some of the configurations that you need to do, be sure to listen to our Form Builder 101 webinar, because we go into details on how to do that process, or how to make sure that they are unique.
Hey, Barrett, question about the data column names.
Sure.
I've seen this with talking with different customers. Some of the words that aren't allowed are actually what you want to put for the label. So like if I want to put date as please enter date here, and sometimes that won't allow me to do that. What would be your suggestions for if I need that to be the label? What's a good practice for a common data column name?
So I mean, for instance, right now I have date and time listed for the label, and then for the data column name, I have time of form start. But let's say we have that exact scenario where we just want date as the label. I'm going to come in here. I've added a new element, and for the label, I'll type in date, and then I'll uncheck the box that says based on label. And for the data column name, I usually do today's _ date. And that's it.
Okay, perfect. Actually, just had another question. I mean, it relates exactly what we're talking about here. With changing a field type, that will cause data that's been collected in that column to be wiped. Is there any way to change the column data type and still keep the data, or do you still have to follow the best practice of making that field disabling and adding a new one?
Great question. And so that's kind of jumping the gun for our next best practice, or our next golden rule. So I'm going to take one step back and then answer that question. For those of you who are not aware, our third Form Builder golden rule is to make sure you do not change an input type, the data size, or encryption of an element on a live form, because it will delete the data. And so this is where, if you plan on making a change, so let's say here I've added this date field, and now I've realized I had it as a text, and I actually really want the user to choose a date from our date widget. So if I already had data in here, our best practice, as this person previously mentioned, is to highlight the current row that we have and then duplicate that input. And then I would change this label to continue to say date, so it looks exactly the same to the user, but I'm going to change the data column name to be today's _ date, and then add the number 1, because it has to be unique. And then in the input properties, I would change this field to a date widget. And then the field that I previously had, where I had collected some data, let's say weeks ago, I would then disable. Now, going back to that person's question, is there a way to change this input type of the original field without losing that data? Unfortunately, no. If you're pushing this data to other, let's say, other databases, then you can easily change this input type, and it won't matter that you've lost any data that's being stored in iForm Builder because everything's automatically going to another source, and so you'll have it stored somewhere else. But if you're keeping all of your data within iForm Builder and you have a live form that you're planning on changing the input type to, best practice is disabling and then adding a new one for the changed field. Any other questions with that, MJ?
Yes.
Okay.
Won't that take away any historical data that has been imported?
So by disabling it, no. What you do, when you click the disable button, it's actually, you're still going to have that row of data within your database, within your form builder database. And then you're adding a new row of data for the new input that you've just added. But if I hadn't disabled this field and had changed the input type, that is when I would lose the data. And that's only a problem if you're keeping your data within iForm Builder. If you're storing it somewhere else, maybe you're using a post URL or using the iForm API, then it won't matter if you lose the data in iForm here because you already have it saved and stored somewhere else. And let's just go into our some additional overview of our smart controls before I actually go in and give you a demo of a form that we have. So creating more advanced forms, that's where we're using our smart controls. That's also where we're using more advanced input types such as the barcode scanning, our Manatee Works widget. You could also have more advanced input types like our third-party app or our URL scheme so that you're able to actually connect with other applications and pass data from other apps on your device into iForm. We have our location widget smart controls, and in my demo form, I'll show you how I was able to use the location widget and then parse out the lat long, create a new dynamic URL, but also by parsing out the lat and long, I'm able to then create the street address for where that person's located at that particular time. With more advanced forms, you also add segmented option lists. So based off of what a user selects in option list A will change what they see in option list B. Advanced forms also use our iForm Builder built-in functions and our smart table search. So
hey, Barrett.
Yeah?
Sorry to interrupt, but on using the post, does using a post data URL count as an API call?
Yes, it does. So every time a record is posted to another web service, then that is considered one API call. If there are subforms attached to that parent form, that's still only one API call.
Okay. And I mean, Barry, you've seen the new form builder a little more than I have. Is it possible to organize by alphabetical order the option lists in the new form builder?
You not necessarily are you able to have it go alphabetically, but in just when I show you the demo later, you'll be able to see that you can actually filter and sort and actually search for option lists within the new option list builder. All right, so going back to just our overview of the smart controls, I've included some links here that I think are extremely helpful for when you're getting started with building smarter forms. One of them is the W3 schools. I find this extremely valuable, especially if I'm trying to do a JavaScript statement. I'm not 100% sure on how to set that statement up. They have all these different tutorials within W3 schools. I also really love to go to the iForm Builder JavaScript Tips and Tricks article. This is where you'll see a list of all these different JavaScript functions that you can add to your forms, like how do you capture credit card information, or how do you capture driver's license information, how do you change the format of the date. So there's two wonderful pages here on all these different options of creating smarter forms and these different JavaScript examples for you. Just a reminder for those of you who are new, or for those of you who are just looking at iForm Builder for the first time, here's a list of the 40 different element input types that iForm Builder has available. Now, this is something that I think is extremely valuable when you're building out your forms. If you're new to form building, or if you have been doing it for a while, sometimes it's nice to just have this table available to look over and to make sure that the kind of question you're asking is actually you're actually using the correct input type to gather the data for that kind of question. Just some additional links so that you guys can reference this later on. I have this in the PDF that I'll share with you. But let's go ahead and talk about these smart controls, and then I'm going to go into the demo and you'll see how I've set some of these smart controls up. So the first thing is, for those of you who are new to form building, I want to point out the Smart Controls section. So this is down underneath the Smart paging. You'll see where it says Smart Controls. And a lot of times when people are looking at it, they only see these top three. So the dynamic value, condition value, and dynamic label. And they don't see that they can actually just scroll down and they have two more options, which is the client validation and validation message. And these two actually go together. But I always want to point out that you can scroll down there because a lot of times people never see that. So in here, I just have a quick description of each one. But the way that I think of this is a dynamic label is what you'll use for any sort of calculation or to default any elements. This is most times you're going to use the dynamic value when you're doing your smart controls. When it comes to viewing or hiding specific elements, that's when we're going to use the condition value. So I always think of that as being all about the view of that specific element. The dynamic label can be really useful if you want to take a user's response and then make the next question more personalized by putting that response in the label. So that's how the dynamic label can be used. As I mentioned, client validation and validation message go together. You're able to set up a statement with the client validation that you set up a strict restriction for the user in submitting the record, and they have to meet a certain specification to be able to hit the submit button at the end of the form. If they don't meet that standard that you put in there, then they'll receive the validation message that you've placed underneath in that validation message spot. Here's a quick example of how that was set up. Now, the one thing I want to point out here is that the validation message, you do have to have quotes around, and that's something that most people forget once they've done the hard part with the client validation code, and they forget that they have to have the quotes around the validation message. So I always want to point that out. And with the dynamic label, you also will use quotes for anytime it's free text. And then you'll notice that I have the data column name of the person's first name in between. So that's where you're able to take their response for what they placed in the first name field and include that in a previous question. Or not a previous question, I'm sorry about that, but in another label after they filled out that question. All right, so let's jump into our demo form, and just bear with me for 1 second here while I bring up my device.
Actually, Barrett, I was thinking, you've built quite a bit of forms here working at iForm Builder. What do you think the most underutilized input type or widget is?
That's a great question. I think the range widget is one that is not used very often. A lot of times people will instead just ask the user to choose a number between, let's say, 1 and 10, instead of actually setting up the range to be between 1 and 10. I think the counter widget is also one that is it's, I guess it's more of a newer one, so maybe not as many people know about it, but it came out almost a year ago. And I think that can be really helpful when they go and, some of those simple things where they just actually have to count trees in a property line or something like that. It can be really helpful that way. MJ, from your experience, what do you think it is?
Just from what taking the certification class, one that I really pulled was the divider and the label. Just be for form presentation and easier on the user. I mean, being able to divide up questions and space stuff properly, I mean, really makes a form look a lot better.
I would agree with that for sure. Going back to our demo today, hopefully you guys can all see my device now. The first thing I want to point out here is that for each one of these forms, you have the option to add your own color for a border. Each of these info buttons, you're able to include a description of what that form's about. If I go into my June demo that I've built for you today, if I click that info button, I see this description, but because I'm on an Apple device, I also can include hyperlinks. So I have these different help desk articles that I think are helpful for users, and so that they can go reference them if they need it. I could also include my phone number or email address in this, and it would then launch my email client or the phone client on Apple devices. But unfortunately, Android devices do not have that capability because there are so many different types of Androids. This part just hasn't been added yet. But as I launch this form, the first thing that you'll notice here is I've pre-populated the user's first name, their last name. I have concatenated it so that the last name and first name are in its own area as well. And I've defaulted today's date into a read-only field. So let's start by just talking about some of those and how I added it. The first thing you'll notice is that for the first name, I've used one of the four iForm Builder built-in functions that we have to populate the user's information. So this is just iFormBuilder.firstName. Then for the last name, I have the iFormBuilder.lastName. And then to concatenate the first and last name into one field and to have it formatted with a comma in between, I've used what I call the squiggly brackets, and I use the built-in functions again. And in between there, I have a plus sign and then quotes for my comma. So I have quote, comma, quote, and then a plus sign again, and then the iFormBuilder.lastName, and then I close with a squiggly bracket. Very, very simple, as you can see. It's almost just, it's an addition problem. That's exactly all that you're doing here. And you just have to always remember that whenever you're doing any sort of smart control, that you're going to use the data column name instead of the label. So as I said, I have a date and time widget that is a read-only widget. And so what I've done in the dynamic value section is I've defaulted it to today's date. And I did that just by doing date and then parentheses. As I go through this, if I go too fast with the details with any part of this, please let me know, and MJ will let me know if that's the case. So beneath that, I added our timer widget because I want to actually calculate once the user starts the form, and once they hit the submit button, the timer is automatically going to stop. So I'll just have this running while I'm completing this form. I don't have any smart controls in that. Underneath that, I have our location widget. So before that, you'll notice I had the location widget and then there was a divider. Now, once I hit the refresh button and I'm capturing my most up-to-date location information, I go back to that page and now I see a new field appear that has the street address based off of the user's location. So the way to set that part up, the first thing I'll point out is I have all of these fields here underneath the location widget that we didn't see when we were completing the form on the device. Now the latitude and longitude field, we never see this on the device because we have false in the condition value. So in the location widget, I have GPS underscore location equals quote quote. So that's what that always does, is that actually clears out any value that previously was collected. So sometimes what can end up happening is you can actually cache some responses from a previous record. And so this is making sure that that doesn't happen. If I go to the comment section, I just want to point out that the data column name is GPS_location. So then to parse out the latitude and longitude, I've gone into the smart controls and I have GPS_location and then .latitude, which is parsing out that information. So the .latitude is part of that JavaScript statement. Between that, because I want to have a comma right in between, I've just done the plus sign and the quotes, comma, quote, and then a plus sign again, and then the GPS_location.longitude. Then I've also created a dynamic URL so that when I look at this report later on, I can actually tap this URL and it'll populate or pop up a Google map that will show exactly the location that this record was captured in. So exactly how I did the concatenation with the first name and last name, and even with the latitude and longitude, the text portion of it I have in quotes, and then I just have the JavaScript portion and the plus signs, and then I have to have the comma in between, and then the GPS_location.longitude to end it, and then the squiggly brackets. And you'll notice I also have this as false to hide it from the users. That's because it doesn't make sense for me to show the users this URL because they won't be able to tap the URL in the form itself. It's only for the reporting side. And then the read-only part where we have the street address being populated based off of the latitude and longitude, I have a good amount of JavaScript statements in here, but these are actually variables that were created in the page level JavaScript. And we actually haven't talked about the page level JavaScript quite yet. But if I go into the edit form properties section of my form and I scroll down to the very bottom, I have a large amount of page level JavaScript in here. And if you're impressed with the fact that I created this, I have to disappoint you and let you know that this was actually a customer who created this and shared it with us. And this is referencing the Google API.
Hey, Barrett.
Yep.
Had a question come up. Is there a way to have a timer automatically start and be hidden from the user, but we can see the information to hopefully streamline the form?
Yes, and we have a help desk article on how to automatically start a timer at the beginning of a form when the user launches the form. MJ, do you mind just sending them along the help desk article on that?
Yep, pulling that up right now.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So going back to our device here, and you'll see our timer still running. If we go into our work order section, so already you'll notice that I have BB dash listed in the work order, and that's because I've actually defaulted a portion of that text that I want in there before the user even completes part of the record or completes the record. The other thing I want to point out here is that for this section, for the work order number, if I go into the input properties, I've also defined the amount of characters that can be displayed for this specific work order. So I put this down to 10 so that they can't submit a work order that has an incorrect amount of numbers or alpha characters. So if I actually launch this widget on the form, I've also included a description. So I've made sure that this is as obvious as possible, that they do not remove that BB dash and that it should be a part of the response. And if I go to the common section of my element properties, in the description section, that's where I put in those details. And I actually see that I had a little error there. But that's where this is coming from.
Barrett, sorry, another question popped up, and this is actually a pretty good one for some folks. Is there, I don't believe there currently is, but is there any way to print from the server side? I know you're able to print an HTML copy of a record through an air printer on the device, but is there any way to do that from the server?
So you can do, when you're logged in, you can always download a PDF version. Hopefully that could help them. Or you can actually download or print the HTML from an email as well.
Okay, but there's no, currently right now there's no button you can just click on the server side of things and it'll automatically print like an HTML copy.
It would have to be a PDF copy, but
Okay.
but yeah, for the HTML, no.
Okay.
A great question. Going back to the work order number here, because I did define how many characters can be placed in here, you'll notice even though I'm trying to type more, it doesn't allow me to do so. Beneath that, I have just, is this a brand new site? And so the reason I'm asking this is based off of what the user chooses with either yes or no, it's going to change the questions that they see. So if they choose no, this is not a brand new site. If I tap and scan a barcode that I have here, it now is actually pre-populating additional information for that site ID and is using our smart table search to just do a read-only field to show when the previous visit was, what the description was for that site, and who the individual that was responsible for that that site visit, who that person was. Now, if I were to go back here and say, is it a brand new site? And I say yes, and I do another scan.
Hey, Barrett, after you're done scanning there, I have 2 more questions.
Sure. So after I do this other scan, you'll notice the site description is blank, so I'll have to start filling this out. I'll just say Barrett test and hit done. After I've completed this record once and synced the device, if I go back and do that scan again, it's going to show up for the site description as the Barrett test. And let me just show one more thing, MJ, and then I'm happy to answer your question. So my first question for the user was, is this a brand new site? And then based off of that, I had it set up so if they said yes, it is a brand new site, that it would show the site visit date, and I had it defaulted to today's date. And if it was a previous site that had been you already had the information for, then it would show the previous visit date. Now, as I mentioned, this is using our smart table search. I'm not going to go into too many details on how to do it. I am including the link, but essentially what this form is actually doing is it's referencing itself so that the next time I sync this record to the cloud, and I do that same scan of the Diet Coke, I'm going to see that all the data that I put in there today with you guys right now. And MJ, what's your question before I go on?
Okay, this one's 2 parts here. Is there a way to add a timer when you add a new field? When you're collecting data and stop the form whenever you have entered that same field again. Example, let's say a person is collecting data and he wants to know in how much time he was able to obtain the data. This field can only be updated the first time the person created that new field of additional information.
So my suggestion or my thought process right now is to have this all in a subform and have the timer in a subform. And so that every time they start a new subform record, a new timer would start.
So basically you're saying, you enter a parent form, put in your high-level details, and possibly have 2 subforms, one that says time in, time out, and have them add together on the parent form?
I would try to do that, yes. Now that's something I haven't done before, so it takes some testing, but that would be my idea.
Okay, perfect. And the other question, if you could scroll back up on the form you were on to where it said BB.
Yep.
Okay. Is there a way to create a required field and ignore the BB?
So right now this is a required field, and that's, I totally get your question because this is a required field and I've placed the BB in there, the user actually would be able to submit this record without actually putting any data in because iForm actually believes that some data has been placed in there because of the BB. So what I would probably try to do instead is use a masking widget and customize that mask and put in, let's say, let me go back here and just add a new field underneath to show you this example. And in the input properties, I would choose the social security number widget and then start by putting BB right in the beginning and then maybe removing some of these this text here. So that would probably be my suggestion, to use masking instead. And hopefully that answers the question. Going back to our form and scrolling through this, I wanted to show you some other smart ways to enhance your forms. The first is with a multi-select option list. So with multi-selects, it's exactly how it sounds. You're able to choose as many selections as you need to. But with this example, I have it set up so that if the user selects unknown as one of those options, then a new field appears underneath where they have to define or give details on what the unknown affiliation is. If I were to go back to this multi-select option list and uncheck unknown, then it'll keep that field hidden. I've done something very similar with the accident type, where I have other as the very top option, and if I choose other, then it asks you to type in some more details, but if I choose any of the other ones, then it hides that question. Now, the reason I want to point these out is because there is a difference with how you set up the statements when you're using a pick list versus a multi-select, and that's because a multi-select option list is a little bit more difficult because it uses binary values instead of using the index values, which is what I used for a pick list. So here for the multi-select option, and again, I'm going to be sending you a form package for the form that we go through today, so you guys will have this as a reference. But this is where our statement appears, and it's in the condition value because we're talking about when this field's going to appear, so the view aspect like we mentioned earlier. So this is how the conditional statement would appear for a multi-select versus when we have our pick list, then it looks much similar. It's using the data column name for the accident type pick list right above it, and then it's using the index value, which is you can find if you go to the option list and option list manager in the advanced section. This is where you see the index values, all right here on the left-hand side. Going further, we have our segmented option list. So based off of what I choose in this first option list will change what I see in this second option list. So if I were to go back to that first one and choose 111, if I go to my second option list, then I only see the 1111 options there. Now, what I've also done is I've tied this together so that it's connected and it's doing a smart table search. So based off of 1, 2, 3, 4, if I choose 1, 2, 3, 4A, then it pre-populates the fields right beneath that with the smart table search. Then moving forward, we have I wanted to show you how to do some basic calculations and to do some subform aggregation, which are also iForm Builder built-in functions. So if I go into this subform, then at the very top, you'll notice that it's pre-populating the user's name as well as the site ID that I placed in at the very beginning. And for this example, the site ID is that barcode number. So to have the data from the parent form pass into the child form, the subform, all I had to do in the smart controls is use our squiggly brackets and then place the data column name of the field in the parent form. So in this, I use the counter widget where I'm just going through here and I'm counting the amount of trees on each side of the site that this person's inspecting. Now I've also included a note here at the bottom because I've used one of our great built-in functions or our great reference IDs that's called Subform Batch Mode. And what it does is after the user hits the submit button, it's going to launch a brand new blank form. So I wanted to include a description to my users so they kind of understood what's happening in it and how to get back to that parent form. So if I hit the submit button, now a blank new form is opening. I still have my user logged in at the top. The site ID is still there, and now I can do another subform record. I can do as many subform records as I need. And once I'm done, then all I have to do is tap the X button and then tap the back button to return to the parent form. And once on the parent form, it should be showing us our sum of trees and with this information. At the very bottom here, we have I've given you the ability with our third-party app to text a supervisor with problems. So that is just going to launch the messenger. We have the directions to the headquarters, which is also third-party. So this has what is opening Google Maps. It's including the latitude and longitude for the office. And so this is where if I could use the app or get directions directly there, then it would make my life a lot easier. And then going back to the iForms, I also have it set up so it's defaulted to the person's username who's logged in. I'm just going to hit the submit button. And now you'll notice that I actually have this with client validation, so it's saved as a draft until I come in and I change this amount so that it's larger than 0. So that's just a quick view on some of the functionalities that we have with the smart controls. And I know you're probably looking at that, and there's a lot that we went over, and I didn't go into too much detail with everything, but in what I share with you today in the PDF, it does go into some more detail on how some of these things are done, as well as some additional information on page-level JavaScript and how to default elements so that they're again, cutting down on human interaction because it's already going to show like today's date. I've also included information for the masking of the elements. So if you want to really customize how those masks appear, I think the social security number widget is great to use for other types of data collection and not just for social security numbers. And MJ, I'm going to bring up the new form builder, but while I'm doing that, are there any questions?
Yes, I have 2 questions. First one, is there a way to have a Boolean to see if the user has entered or not to the field he created before so that the timer doesn't start over again?
Can you repeat that question?
Yes, sorry, I probably went a little fast there. Is there a way to have a Boolean to see if the user has entered or not to the field he created before so that the timer doesn't start over again?
I would have to look into that. We'll definitely have to get back to that person. I'm sure there's a way. I just don't know of it right now.
Okay, so follow up afterwards. Okay, perfect. And finally, is the blank record functionality available in Android?
The subform batch mode? I'm assuming that's what they're talking about. I believe it is, but I'd have to double check on that.
So okay. And
all right. And
also, sorry, one more just came in.
Sure.
Is there any widget that does speech to text?
Siri.
So only iOS right now?
Well, I'm sure Android has the same thing, but I just don't know the name of the Android one. By any chance, MJ, are you able to log into the new form builder?
That works. Give me 2 seconds. Let me just pull up the sidebar here. Are we able to see it?
Awesome. So thank you, MJ, for doing this. So as you guys can see already, it's a brand new interface. It looks nothing like the current form builder that we have. You'll notice at the top, by default, you'll see the ID, the label, and the name. Now that name is actually where we have the naming convention currently. What I love is that you're able to see the label, which is what the user is seeing on the device. You'll also see at the very top, you can actually customize this table and how it appears. So if you wanted to see who was created by, let's check that off. Or let's select created by. Then a new row appears and tells you who actually did that form. Under the drop-down menu for more, you can see if there's page-level JavaScript or if they've used any localizations or any of the reference IDs. So if you're more of a developer, then you're able to come in here and see what forms have page-level JavaScript, and you can actually make quick edits to some of that information. What we've done with this new form builder is we've actually separated where forms are created and where option lists are created. If you click on one of the forms, then it'll immediately bring us to our form builder, and this is our default view, where on the left-hand side we'll see all the different types of elements that you can add to a form, and on the right-hand side you have all the input properties that we're used to seeing, the common section where you have the smart controls, and so on. What I really like about this new form builder is not only do you have this device view, but you can also copy, cut, and paste within this device view that you're looking at. You can change what kind of device you have. So if we scroll up just a little bit, MJ, we have a drop-down menu for the device. So if you're on an Android or an iOS, you can choose which one which device your users will have access to see how it appears here. Another thing that's really nice about it is MJ, if you scroll up again,
yep.
At the very top, you don't have to just look at the form builder and the view that we have set up for you here. You can have it so that the input properties and the fields are all in one column, and that's right under the iForm Builder logo. You can choose if you have it on the left or the right. And the last view that we have for our form builder is a list view. So for those of you who are developers, I think you'll really like this view because we're in this table view and you're able to add elements here, but you can also view and see all the dynamic values and condition values in here and maybe copy, cut, and paste as needed. So if you go to the more for the drop-down menu, let's check off dynamic value and condition value. So in here, I guess it's a basic form, so we hadn't added any dynamic value, but you can actually come in here and make edits and type in as needed for the condition and dynamic value. So I think that's a huge benefit with the new form builder as well. One thing I do want to note is every time you make a change to your form, make sure you go up to the Save button, and so that you don't leave what you've done without saving it. So let's quickly jump over to our option list. So let's actually select it from the very top, MJ, where you see the forms in orange. So choose the option list one. And this is where you see the table. It looked exactly like what we saw with the forms, but you can choose what you're seeing here, and you can also search for specific option lists as needed. Now let's...
With the way these option lists are set up, I mean, this is, I think, my third time in this form builder. Is there any sort of, is it still following? Is there any sort of organization to it, or is it the way it was added, or is it alphabetical or?
Currently, it's the ones that were most recently used or activated, I guess you can think of it.
Okay.
So let's select one of these option lists, maybe Fave Food. And you can easily come in here, add new options to the bottom. You can change the sort order. You can change the key value. You can add conditional values by selecting condition value from the table setup at the very top. And one of my favorite things that we have here with our option list, I know I'm flying through a lot of this, but we have a way that you can actually import a list. So a lot of times when I've been working with customers, they're always asking, hey, can I upload a CSV file for my large option list? And I used to hate saying no to that. And now I can say yes. So with that up button, MJ, there you go. If you click the up button, you can either type in the raw data or you can go to the upload button and upload a CSV file. Now we do have a standard that you have to set up that CSV file so it matches what we have here in the database, but that's just like how you would do it when you're building forms anyways, so that's something you guys should be familiar with. And I know that was a quick snapshot into the new form builder, so thank you, MJ, for helping me out with that. I'm going to take back the presenter rights and just do one more thing before we head out here. And that is when you go through the PDF that I share with you, I do want to point out that I have a lot of links in here to different help desk articles to really try to assist you to move to that next level with the smart controls. And
Hey, Barrett.
yep.
Um, I know where this is located at on the old form builder, but on the new form builder, is there a way to, like auto save every time you add something new?
Currently, no. And so that's where I
Not on
mentioned
the new form builder, correct?
not on the new form builder. You have to hit the save button.
Okay.
So with that, we're coming to the end of the session. I want to thank you guys for taking time out of your day to join us for the session. And I really hope that you got a lot out of it. And my main goal today was to have you start thinking about all the different possibilities you have for your forms to really create a more dynamic experience, a better experience for all parties involved with your project. In the next 48 hours, you'll receive the recording from today, you'll receive the form demo, and the session PDF. And with that, MJ, are there any other questions?
With the new form builder we just went into, is that link that I was on available for customers to currently use?
So we did have it open for different beta testers, and then we got a flood of beta testers, and so we have all that we need at this time. But the goal is to have the new form builder out and about and in your hands by the end of the summer. So everyone be ready for it. And what we'll have is you'll be able to choose between using our classic version and the form builder 2.0. Any other questions, MJ?
Hold on one sec. Sorry, when we were showing off the new form builder, I got a little backlogged.
Oh, sure.
Is there a way to upload an XLSX file with multiple sheets that already matches the column names in the form?
At this time, no. It's just the CSV files that you'll have to upload. So for that, if there was a parent form and a subform, or if it's multiple option lists that you're thinking of, it has to be the flat CSV file for the upload.
Is there any way to look up an address with a third-party API?
So I would love for that to happen, and I bet there is a way to do it. I know that in the past, I believe Ben and someone else on our team were working with customers where they're able to actually get a geolocation of a user, and based off of where they were in that area, they'd actually assign a specific address. So there's that kind of functionality, and if that individual wants to talk in more detail with how to do that with their project, we can definitely touch base on that.
Okay, Barrett, it looks like that was the last question.
All right, well, thank you so much for attending, everybody, today. I really appreciate it, so thank you again.